Well, good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Tom Schlueter with today's Tom's Take. Please, again, I'm sorry that I could not do more than a minute and a half yesterday. We had a very long and tiring day starting Sunday evening into yesterday. Just to repeat a little bit of that, we had a powerful tribunal meeting, including 6 states up in the Illinois area. Powerful meeting. I preached on Sunday morning. We went to the apostles' house for lunch, and then I got a notification on my phone that our flight at 7 o'clock Sunday night was canceled. We had a rental car where we had to drive back an hour, a little over an hour back to St. Louis to drop off. So we thought, well, let's see what other flights are available. There were no more available. Well, what about tomorrow? Yes, there were at 8 o'clock Monday night. And Kay and I decided, we've got a rental car. Let's contact the company, see if they will just extend our rental all the way down to Dallas. And they did. But that meant we had a 10 to 12 hour trip on the road, which we do many, many times. But I don't do it in a Chevrolet Malibu. I do it in my big truck. And so by the time we got home, my body was sore, we were tired, we were worn out, but we are refreshed now. And the Lord kept on speaking a word or a phrase into my heart this morning as I was up early with Him. And He simply said, you realize it's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of perspective. Now, this has nothing to do with our trip, but in some ways it does, because I preached a portion of what I'm going to just briefly mention to you on my Tom's Take this morning on Sunday morning. But let me backtrack with you to a couple Bible stories, okay? And I'm always amazed when you see some of these stories. The TV and movie industry always likes to elaborate and expand and make something a little bit more dramatic than what they thought it was. And we've seen that with so many movies that have been based on biblical stories throughout our lives. And some of them are really good, and some of them are really bad. One of them that's really good, and I hope that y'all are watching it, is The Chosen. But there are some that just think, okay, this is pushing the envelope as far as adding material that really wasn't necessary to add. We're watching a series right now on Prime Video on the House of David. It's telling the story of him growing up as the shepherd and everything else. And I've already seen kind of a sneak peek of his battle with Goliath. And this has been done in so many movies, I can't even count the number of times. But David is facing Goliath. Goliath is starting to move towards him. He's throwing spears at him. And in this movie, one of the spears actually nicks David and knocks him down. And I'm just kind of waiting to see what they're going to do about that. But anyway, it looks like Satan, or yes, it is Satan, or Goliath is in charge of the field. And Goliath is coming at David with full force. Well, that's not the story. That's not the perspective of God. That's not the perspective of faith. Let me read to you the story. And this is obviously from 1 Samuel 17, 45 through 49. I'm not going to read the whole story, just this portion. Then David. Now, all that has happened up to this point is the Philistine has been mocking. He has been mocking now even David as he shows up on the field with no armor on and with a slingshot. And he's been mocking him. That is all true. But then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all of the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Now notice, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. We don't have to embellish that story. Maybe we need to if they need to make the movie an hour and a half rather than an hour. Sorry. But we don't need to embellish this. This is a beautiful demonstration of the faith that was in David and his divine perspective. He was seeing things on the field through God's eyes, not his own. He knew who God was, for he had spent time with him. He had sung with him. He had meditated on him. And his music lifted itself up to heaven and garnered a special covenantal relationship with God's heart. And so out of that perspective, he sees a giant, maybe at least a half again of the size, if not double the size of what David is. But that did not change David's perspective. And he quickly approached the enemy. He wasn't running around. He wasn't scrambling for stones. He wasn't trying to have a spear or a javelin miss him. He ran towards the battle, pulled out a stone, slung that thing, and brought the giant down. That is our perspective through God's eyes, folks. That is what we ought to see when we see something that looks much bigger and more intimidating to us than what is in our spirits. Take on the perspective of God. Now, this is where I brought it into the message that I had on Sunday, because I was talking to people about sometimes, and I mentioned this to you last week with the Tom's Take, how many of us can feel insignificant. We can feel small, unusable, losers. We can see ourselves as puny in the sight of the giants or the strongholds or the struggles of the world around us. But interestingly, that was not Rahab's perspective. Come on, Rahab, the prostitute. She's watching everything unfold from the walls of Jericho. And she has a complete changing of her perspective. I believe it was happening in the natural, but it obviously at some point dug deep into her spirit and into her heart so that she could point out to the spies that she had hidden, this is the true God. Nothing had even happened yet with Jericho, but this is the true God. A perspective which allowed her to hide them, and then to make sure her family was gathered, and then to make sure that those in the city had known that they were now gone and they were out in the land again, even though they were still hidden under the flax stuff that was in her apartment or in her home. The perspective changed. Well, what changed it? Well, I think one thing that very rapidly changed it, obviously she had a window that was on the wall. A window that everyone in the Israeli army would quickly see when there was a red cord hanging down from it. And she could look out that window towards the River Jordan, which is not that very far away. Probably less than a mile. And what did she see? What everyone else saw, but everyone else was petrified. she had a change of perspective. Because just a few days earlier, she miraculously saw the flooding waters of the Jordan, a half a mile across, being pushed back miles to the city of Adam. Then she saw hundreds of thousands of soldiers and people crossing on a dry riverbed towards Jericho. Now they would stay at Gilgal for 3 days, but you can imagine how the perspective of Rahab changed in that moment. Now she could have been overcome by fear. She could have been overcome by intimidation. She could have been overcome by, I need to escape out of here. We're all doomed. We're going to die, whatever else. But she knew there was a power here that she needed to embrace. More importantly, a God that she needed to embrace. And we know the rest of the story. And how she becomes actually a part of the family tree, not only of David. Hey, we just dealt with David, didn't we? But then on to our Lord and Savior, Jesus, our Messiah. It's all a matter of perspective. Now, let me finish with this, because many times we lose our perspective because we haven't grasped the whole story. See, Rahab saw the complete story. David saw the complete story. He knew that the battle was the Lord's. Rahab knew that this God is the God of the universe, and he is about ready to move upon the land. But how many times do we forget the complete story? Let me just share briefly what I mean. We all know that Christ died for us, he was buried for us, and he rose again for us. But wait a minute, the scriptures say something very profound. He didn't just die for us, buried for us, and raised for us. The scriptures make it very clear that we were put to death with him on the cross. We were buried with him in the tomb. And we were risen with him, raised up with him out of the tomb. We are been co-crucified. We've been co-buried. We've been co-risen. But it doesn't even stop there, because after that we've got the ascension. And so we are now co-seated with him, seated with him in the heavenly places. We are therefore co-heirs of him. Not an inheritance that we'll get in the sweet by and by when we finally enter into the courts of heaven. We are co-heirs with him right now, co-seated with him right now. Everything that Christ accomplished, he grabbed a hold of us and we became a part of it. See, that's what was in David's heart. That's what eventually caught hold in Rahab's heart. And that's what has to catch hold in each of our hearts. So don't look at the world around you and be intimidated by it. Don't be overwhelmed by the strength of the fortress ahead of you. Don't be intimidated by a giant that faces you, that may be twice as tall as you, and is armored with full armory. The battle is the Lord's. And we are in him, and he is in us. And finally, we are co-laborers with him, which means that at some point, David, as a part of his divine covenantal relationship with God, picked up a stone and slung it. Rahab invited spies into her home and hid them. We need to co-labor with him, knowing that the battle is his, and we are intimately entwined with him. We've been crucified, buried, raised up, seated, full inheritance So let's get busy with the labor part. It's all a matter of perspective. Blessings to all of you. I'll be with you again tomorrow.